2022 Audi E-Tron GT RS Prototype Drive Review. Fun while it lasts.
Please support us by pressing the like button and subscribing so that this channel will grow and provide many benefits for you. And don't forget to press the bell icon, so that you get notification updates about the latest videos from us. Thank you.
Ever been on one of those roller coasters where a sign warns you to keep your head pinned against the headrest? Well, the 2022 Audi E-Tron GT RS needs a sign like that, and we have the headache to prove it. It took us 4 good stabs of the accelerator, and 4 slams of our skull against the headrest, before we learned our lesson, partly because we're slow learners and partly because it's hard to wrap your head around how quickly the Audi E-Tron GT can accelerate from virtually any speed. Audi claims a 0 to 60 mph time of 3.1 seconds for the 590 HP E-Tron GT RS. An overboost feature bumps output to 637 horsepower in short bursts, but as is so often the case, that number doesn't tell the whole story. Its 3.1 second time isn't just mash and go, mind you, as its Quattro all-wheel drive system lets the rear end skitter around a bit before it digs in. But it's when you hammer the throttle while on the move, no matter if you're going 15 miles per hour or 50, that the rush of its 612 pound-feet of on-demand torque really hits you, quite literally, in our case. As in its Porsche Taycan cousin, there's a 2-speed transmission at work back there, though we'll be darned if we could ever feel it shifting. This is as good a time as any to mention that the E-Tron GT RS we were driving was a European spec prototype. Audi, like any competent drug dealer, wanted to give us a quick taste before sales begin in earnest. When the US spec car arrives later this year, it'll carry a price tag of roughly $140,995. We say roughly because Audi hasn't finalized the destination charge for 2022. Accompanying it will be the non-RS model, the E-Tron GT Quattro, with 522 horsepower, 464 pound-feet, a 0 to 60 time of 3.9 seconds, and a price tag of about $101,995, and perhaps less risk of a concussion. Head-banging good drive. For all the head-banging, we had a hell of a good time during our short drive in the E-Tron GT RS. As thrilling as the acceleration is, the car is no less amazing or amusing in the curves, taking the same dignified approach to fast driving as other sport-tuned Audis and playing it back in fast motion. The finger light steering belies the 5,000-plus pound weight. HT of the E-Tron GT. A good chunk of its heft is concentrated in the 93 kWh underfloor battery pack, but the upshot is that weight helps lower the car's center of gravity, with optional 4-wheel steering to further improve its stability, which we're betting it probably doesn't need. The E-Tron GT RS flies through the curves with maximum grip and minimum fuss before rocketing onto straights like a rocket. The experience is enhanced by a piped-in soundtrack, complete with a grumbly idle. We're not sure the digitized noises are necessary, but they do lend the driving experience a sort of sci-fi unreality. Are we really jetting through the curves this quickly, or are we having a dream about the world's most intense driving simulator? If it was a dream, you were all in it. Right? Yep, that's pretty good, too. The E-Tron GT is home to Audi's first 3-chamber air suspension system, which the company says allows for greater differentiation between comfort and sport modes. We didn't notice all that much of a difference. We were a bit preoccupied with clinging onto the steering wheel for dear life. But we thought it delivered what air suspensions do best, which is to maintain comfort and poise while delivering physics-defying handling behavior. That said, a good, hard bump sent the suspension up to the top of its travel. We've driven plenty of cars over that same bump with less drama, but we can't all be perfect, can we? The only other imperfection noted during our brief drive of the E-Tron GT RS was its brake pedal placement and overall feel. The pedal itself is mounted so high that we could slide our foot sideways off the accelerator and right underneath the brake, which also has very abrupt travel. Lowering the brake pedal, or increasing its travel length, would give a more consistent feel between it and the accelerator. Range needs more range. And then there's the issue of range. Both E-Tron GT models share the same 93 kWh battery pack. Audi estimates a range of 238 miles for the plain old GT and 232 miles in the RS we drove. The company is awaiting official EPA ratings. Considering the type of driving the e-Tron GT RS invites, foot to the floor, skull into the headrest, hitting though. Say numbers won't be easy unless you take it easy. We'll have to wait for our first full test of a US spec car to get a true sense of its range. Now, 232 miles is probably fine for most EV owners. With home charging, it should ensure at least a few days of driving between electric fill-ups, and it's worth noting that the e-Tron GT is capable of utilizing 800-volt, 270 kW fast charging, which Audi says will juice a dead battery to 80% in a little over 20 minutes. Electrify America, Audi's charging gear partner, supports 800-volt charging at its public stations. Still, the e-Tron GT is supposed to be Audi's halo car, and that means it needs bragging rights numbers, like the 300 to 400 mile, or more, ranges achieved by some Teslas. To paraphrase an executive from another EV-focused automaker, if your range number doesn't start with a 3, you're not in the game. Model looks like a model. That's too bad because aside from the medium-length tether, everything about the e-Tron GT is halo-worthy. The cabin is high-end in materials and execution, and unlike some other EVs, it doesn't look like it was pulled from a booth at the Consumer Electronics Show. No orientation needed. If you can work the controls in any other Audi, you won't have any problems in the e-Tron GT. And can we talk about the exterior styling for a second? The e-Tron GT RS is a great-looking car in pictures, but in person, it's a real jaw-dropper, and 7 rupees with a swimsuit model body. The few times we slowed down enough to make the e-Tron GT more than a passing blur, people turned, gazed, pointed, and smiled, presumably at the Audi and not its driver. Our responsible journalist side needs to also address the elephant in the room, which is the GT's close relation to the Porsche Taycan. Having no doubt been asked this question about a jillion times, the Audi PR person had a sensible answer. These cars weren't developed in a vacuum. Audi doesn't deny the ties that bind them but asserts that the cars are tuned for different audiences, with the Taycan, especially the Turbo S, aimed at the performance market, the e-Tron designed to be more of a grand tourer, and the RS model splitting the difference. For what it's worth, this author thinks the Audi is the better-looking car. The Taycan looks like its mascara is running. Hopefully, the US spec car won't differ too much from the one we drove, because we loved our first experience in the Audi e-Tron GT RS. Driving it was an absolute delight, like a nice soak in a hot bath, including the part where you forget to test the water with your toe and scald your foot and then the timer that stops the bubbles after 15 minutes. All Audi needs to do is talk to its corporate colleagues and crew about getting some of those nice soft pillows that Bentley attaches to its headrests. That, and 350 miles or so of range, would make the e-Tron GT RS the perfect sporty electric car.
Thanks for watching. Drop a like, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to watch more videos like this.
(2022) Infiniti QX55 First Drive Review. Is it a modern FX, or a letdown?
Please support us by pressing the like button and subscribing so that this channel will grow and provide many benefits for you. And don't forget to press the bell icon, so that you get notification updates about the latest videos from us. Thank you.
My dad's Chrysler Town & Country catching fire on the Tri-Borough Bridge during rush hour traffic was probably the best thing to happen to us. Well, me. I mean, don't get me wrong. It was probably a super bad day for my parents. But it led to my dad swearing off minivans for good. What we got next? A 2003 Infiniti FX 35 in laser red. Was our family's first cool car, and it wound up being the car I learned to drive, and flunked my first driver's test, in. So it was with equal parts nostalgia and excitement that I took delivery of a dynamic Sunstone Red 2022 Infiniti QX55. The company's modern-day successor to the FX, almost 20 years after my family's van's demise, for a California test drive. What does the QX55 have to do with the FX? To understand the pressure that not just I, but Infiniti, is putting on the new QX55, it's important to understand the original FX first. Simply put, it was a game-changer. It was among the first SUVs to be built on a car-based platform, what we now interchangeably call a crossover. And whereas contemporary crossovers were built on the platforms of front-drive family sedans, the FX was underpinned by Nissan's rear-drive FM platform, shared with the reborn Nissan 350Z sports car and the hot-selling Infiniti G35 sedan and coupe. With a 280 HP V6 or a 320 HP V8 backing up the sporty chassis, the FX experience was a Nissan Z with stadium seating. We wrote back in 2004. You have the Infiniti FX, as well as the Porsche Cayenne, to thank for the slew of sports and super SUVs now available. Even so, the FX suffered an odd name change for 2014, to QX70, and the model was put out to pasture in 2017 never to be directly replaced. Infiniti sees the new 2022 QX55 as the spiritual successor to the FX. The all-new QX55 channels the spirit of the groundbreaking Infiniti FX that created the coupe crossover segment nearly 2 decades ago. The company said, "It's worth noting the FX wasn't a coupe, and the QX55 isn't, either." FX was probably mentioned just as many times as the word "dynamic" was during Infiniti's Zoom-ified presentation to the press. That's a lot of pressure to put on what's essentially a QX50 with a swoopy roofline. While the FX shared much with the Nissan Z and Infiniti GT QX55 doesn't have anything mechanical in common with the new, old, 400Z or Infiniti Q5060s, the G successor. Instead it's much more of a QX50. Infiniti's everyday compact luxury crossover, with a fastback roofline that harkens back to that FX. The QX55 shares its variable compression 2.0-liter turbocharged i4 and CVT with its more traditionally styled sibling as it does in the QX50. The VC turbo engine makes 268 horsepower and 280 pound-feet of torque. Infiniti says it's made some tuning improvements to the CVT for the QX55. Unlike the QX50, all-wheel drive is standard on the QX55, but the vehicle is still based on a front-wheel drive layout. Although ostensibly designed to copy the fastback profile of rivals like the BMW X4 and Mercedes-Benz GLC Coupe, the QX55's modest roof rake helps increase its torsional rigidity versus the QX50, while the stylish standard 20-inch wheels necessitated some minor suspension tweaks. Okay, so how does the new Infiniti QX55 drive? In person, the 2022 QX55 makes quite the impression. The sharp red paint on our QX55 really highlights the scarab-like profile, while the SUV's crisp sculpted lines look genuinely great sparkling in the sun. While many fastback SUV coupes, like those from Infiniti's German rivals, end up looking a bit like irradiated turtles. The rake in the QX55's roof isn't quite as aggressive and its rear glass is a little more upright. There's a conventionalism to the QX55's design that makes it both contemporary and yet an effective homage to the original FX. At the same time, it's the type of design that makes you want to go drive somewhere looking for a pretty Instagram backdrop. Rare for a crossover, especially at the QX55's $47,525 starting price. It's a damn shame about the driving experience then. Despite the promises on the tin, the QX55 driving experience doesn't move beyond that of the QX50, and in some ways it even regresses the QX55's powertrain as the main pain-sore point. Infiniti's VC turbo engine sure seems to have the makings of a good engine, but we'll never know for sure with this transmission. AC time equals 0.4s, greater than. Ignoring the fascinating variable compression technology, the engine has a gut punch of mid-range torque once the compression ratio falls and the turbo spools, and it sounds throaty, tickling the ear when on power. But strapping this engine to a CVT is setting it up for failure. The engine already has a dozen different variables to contend with, and it doesn't need a variable ratio gearbox, making things even more complicated. Despite overly aggressive throttle response attempting to mask the indecision going on under the hood, there's a noticeable lag between the inputs from your right foot and any forward motion as both the engine and transmission figure out how to respond. The end result is a surgy drive experience where occupants are constantly rocked forward and backward in their seats as the engine and transmission attempt to, but never do, sync up. It's like the engine is doing the tango and the CVT the Macarena. It feels as ridiculous as that sounds. Infiniti has a new front-drive-oriented 9-speed automatic in the updated QX60 but has no current plans to bring it to the QX50 or 55. We'd recommend making and then fast-tracking those plans. The rest of the experience doesn't get any better from there. Like most of Infiniti's latest products, the QX55 uses a steer-by-wire system. By all accounts, the tech works great in fighter jets and airliners, but it needs some serious fine-tuning in automotive applications, especially semi-sporty ones. There's no semblance of feel or feedback from the front wheels sent to steering wheel, either through bends or while motoring down the highway. Sport mode adds weight to the steering, but the end result feels like a force feedback video game controller. The stiffer structure and suspension changes haven't done the QX55's ride any favors, either. The QX50 has a notably refined ride for the segment, but the QX55 feels flinty and less composed than its more sedate stablemate. Is the interior at least good? Design is the QX55's single biggest redeeming quality both outside and inside. Thankfully, the QX55 retains the QX50's well-executed interior ambiance. The dash design is modern and elegant, especially on higher trims equipped with the two-tone suede-topped dashboard, and material quality on our mid-grade QX55 Essential test vehicle was excellent, even if there's too much Nissan switchgear for our liking. Although the QX55's rear seats lose 3 inches of headroom to the rakish roofline and footroom is a bit tight, the back seat is otherwise a pleasant place to spend time for a 6-foot-tall adult male. Cargo volume drops somewhat, too, from 31.4 cubic feet in the QX50 to 26.9 cubic feet in the QX55. So is the QX55 worth it? Pricing for the 2022 QX55 starts at $47,525 for a base luxe model, about $3,000 more than a comparable QX50. The mid-level QX55 Essential adds heated and cooled seats, a heated steering wheel, a 16-speaker Bose audio system, Nissan's stellar ProPilot Assist driver support system, and a handful of other features, bumping the starting price up to $52,625. The range-topping 2022 QX55 Sensory adds 3-zone climate control, ambient interior lighting, fancier leather and wood trim, and other niceties. It starts at $58,075. Ultimately, the QX55 is 2 steps forward and 1 back. Infiniti's design team drags the brand forward, but the engineering team's hands are tied by its reliance on a CVT and an unfinished steer-by-wire system. Those who don't know, or don't care, what a sporty SUV is will likely be impressed. The QX55 looks the part, and the Infiniti's jackrabbit throttle response, semi-pleasing engine growl, and flinty ride will be overlooked because, naively, that's what some think a performance vehicle should be like. Unfortunately for Infiniti, anyone who spent any time in a base model X4 or GLC coupe won't be fooled. Nor would any former FX driver looking for Infiniti to return to glory.
Thanks for watching. Drop a like, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to watch more videos like this.